Hello, it's Jonathan Kemp here at Kemp Strings and the University of St Andrews. Today we're going to talk about frequency modulation, or FM synthesis. We're going to explore this using Dexed, the multi-platform, multi-format plugin that has the same sound generation and programming possibilities as the Yamaha DX7. When we open the Dexed for the first time, we might get an interesting preset such as this. But let's click the Init button to initialize the synth to a very basic sine wave setting and learn how to control FM synthesis ourselves. If we press a key now, you can hear a pure tone. To visualize what's going on in the sound, I've got Reaper's built-in oscilloscope meter running, and this plots wave amplitude against time. I've also got Reaper's built-in spectrogram meter running, and this plots frequency on the vertical scale, with 0 Hz down the bottom of the screen and 22,050 Hz at the top of the screen here, with the loudness represented by the colour and time running horizontally, with now on the right hand side. I'll now play a note and hold the waveform. You can see the pure tone sine wave has this smooth shape, and playing different notes on the synth gives us a single frequency component. Playing a relatively high pitch gives us the frequency component up here, and a low note gives us the frequency component down here. And we're going to play lots of examples playing A4, which has a frequency of 440 Hz or 440 cycles per second. On this instrument, there are 6 sine wave oscillators, or operators as they are known in FM synthesis. At the moment, only the first operator has its level up. In frequency modulation synthesis, we are going to use one operator to modulate or wobble the frequency of another operator. There are different arrangements for the operators available, and these are called algorithms. Currently, we are on algorithm 1, and as is typical for FM synthesis, operator 2 is stacked vertically above operator 1. The operator at the bottom of the stack, here operator 1, is referred to as a carrier frequency, and the operator above, here operator 2, is called the modulation frequency. With the level of operator 2 down at 0, we have no modulation, hence the pure tone we heard before. If we now turn up the level of operator 2, then we can start to hear the result of operator 2 modulating the frequency of operator 1. Let's hold A4 and do that. So you see and hear a change in the tone quality, with extra sidebands or paritals being created in the frequency spectrum when one frequency modulates another. If I freeze the waveform during the note, then you can see how the frequency, or rate at which we're going through the sine wave, increases once per cycle and decreases once per cycle, resulting in a waveform that has the same overall repetition rate, but has a different shape, resulting in a pitch sound with a new tone quality. Instead of a pure tone, we have a harmonic series. This happens in this example because the carrier frequency and modulation frequency are equal, as can be seen from the fact that f equals 1 for both operator 1 and operator 2, so the frequency coming out spends half the cycle below and half the cycle above the carrier frequency, and this repeats exactly. Here the carrier frequency of 440 Hz is still there, and the new sidebands are harmonics at twice the carrier frequency, which is 880 Hz, and 3 times the carrier frequency, which is 1320 Hz, and so on. We can play a tune with this, of course, and all the notes are going to have the same type of harmonic series with a different frequency spacing, and therefore a different pitch. Okay, so what else can we do? We could change the modulation frequency. Changing the coarse setting for operator 2 up to f equals 2 and pressing A4 again, we can see that the spacing has changed in the spectrum. If I switch it back and forth, you can see that the spacing between the harmonics is being changed here, giving us the same pitch but a different tone quality. The root of the harmonic series, which is called the fundamental, is the same, but we are switching between the full harmonic series we had before and an odd harmonic series, where only 440 Hz and 3 times 440 Hz and 5 times 440 Hz and so on are sounding. This is similar to what we get when switching between a sawtooth wave and a square wave in analog subtractive synthesizers and their emulations. Let's look at the picture to understand what's going on. The carrier frequency, which is the frequency of operator 1, is the center of a bunch of sidebands in the frequency spectrum. And the spacing between the sidebands is determined by the modulation frequency, which is the frequency of operator 2. How many different sidebands we have is controlled by what's called the modulation index, which is determined by the level of operator 2. That's the fraction either side of the carrier frequency through which the frequency modulates. So if we want to build something that looks exactly like this, we might want to have the carrier frequency about 5 times bigger than the modulation frequency, and then adjust the level of operator 2 to produce the correct number of sidebands. So let's have a go building a sound that looks like this and check that we can control things. So we will make the coarse control for operator 1 go up to f equals 5, where f is the frequency multiplication factor. In this case, the carrier frequency is going to be 5 times the frequency normally associated with whatever key we press on the keyboard. And the spacing is just going to be 1 times the frequency normally associated with whatever key we press on the keyboard, because the modulation frequency is determined by the frequency of operator 2, which is still set to frequency multiplication factor of f equals 1. When we press A4, we will get a carrier frequency of 5 times 440 Hz, and the spacing is just 440 Hz. We can play low down on the keyboard or higher up on the keyboard, and we always get this pattern of different partials. That's a symmetrical pattern around the carrier frequency. As I say, we can control how many sidebands there are by adjusting the level of operator 2. As we turn up, we get the sidebands filling out the harmonic series. Okay, so what else can we do? Well, we can make fine adjustments to frequencies of these as well. So we could make the spacing between the sidebands change so they're no longer perfect harmonics. Using the tune control for each oscillator, you can fine-tune oscillators by plus or minus 7 cents. That means 7% of a semitone. And this is quite a subtle effect in terms of tuning the modulation frequency. Using the fine control for operator 2, on the other hand, we can increase the modulation frequency to be such that the spacing between partials is noticeably bigger than that required for a harmonic series. This quickly results in nasty sounding inharmonic tones with an ill-defined pitch. If we increase the level of operator 2 to increase the number of sidebands, then we will start creating sidebands that should be off the bottom of the screen. These negative frequency components actually reflect as out of phase positive frequencies, as you can hear when I change the spacing. Another thing we can do is change the spacing to be equal to 2 times the fundamental associated with the key we're pressing, and we can do this by setting the frequency multiplication factor to f equals 2 for operator 2. So we've got the carrier frequency still being 5 times the note we play on the keyboard, and we're making the spacing between the sidebands 2 times the note on the keyboard. So this time we've got 440 Hz there, and then 3 times 440 and 5 times 440 Hz, which is a carrier, and 7 times and 9 times and 11 times and so on. So we're back to having an odd harmonic series again. You can do all sorts of different things with the synth, including changes using envelopes. Operator 1's got an envelope here, operator 2's got an envelope here, and so on. So far, we've got the level controls down at 0 for operators 3, 4, 5, and 6, and we're just going to work with the 2 operators. What do the envelopes do? Well, if we start with this picture, this shows us what operators are like on the Yamaha DX7 and the dexed. Okay, so the envelope basically looks a bit like an attack, decay, sustain, release envelope for normal synths, but on the Yamaha DX7 and dexed there are extra options. If we set EG level number 4 to 0, then when you press a key, the envelope output increases from 0 to reach the value of EG level 1, with EG rate 1 determining the rate at which this happens. EG rate 1 is therefore what would be referred to as the attack rate. And then we can change the level and rate for a couple of different steps while the key is being held down. And then when you let go of the key, we're going to get a different gradient, which is determined by EG rate 4. And this determines what on most synths might be termed the release rate. We could keep EG level 1 at maximum and set EG level 2 to be a little lower and EG level 3 lower still, and then EG level 3 will act as a sustain level, which is the level of the envelope after holding down the key long enough for the first 3 gradients to be played out. I've done this nice bit of maths if anyone wants to actually look at what we mean by gradient. The attack time is basically determined by the difference in the EG levels divided by the EG rate setting. But you don't have to understand that to understand how to use it. What we want to do is just play with it a little bit and get some examples. What if we want to make it have an attack which is not instant? Okay, so here turning EG rate 1 down, you can see how the attack time is longer. It's actually getting rid of the mess at the start of the spectrogram for each note because it's now fading in nicely instead of clicking at the start of the note. So yeah, we could get rid of the click at the end of the note by changing the rate at the end as well. Increasing or decreasing the rates and levels here, we could build something that looks a little bit more like what we have in the picture. Okay, so by changing the envelope for operator 1, we're changing the amplitude over time for the carrier frequency, and therefore defining the overall loudness profile of the note. What happens when we change the envelope for operator 2 when that is controlling the modulation? Well, it's going to change the level of what's coming out of operator 2 in a time-varying way. And bearing in mind what we were saying earlier about the spacing in the spectrum and so on, the level of operator 2 determines how many sidebands there are. So if we make the level of operator 2 change enough, it's going to change how many sidebands happen over time. Okay, so the level of operator 2 changes the bandwidth, and we can make that time varying so it works a little bit like when we apply an envelope to a filter in an analog synth. At the moment the spectrum is centered on 5 times the frequency normally produced by the key we're pressing, so it's behaving like a bandpass filter centered on that frequency. If we set the carrier frequency in operator 1 to have a frequency multiplication factor of f equals 1 instead, then the spectrum is centered around the fundamental frequency normally produced by the key we're pressing. The level of operator 2, which controls the number of sidebands, therefore acts like the cutoff frequency of a low-pass filter. going wah. So far we've looked at the operators having their frequencies determined as a ratio of f with respect to the frequency associated with the key we are pressing. Another option is to switch from ratio mode to fixed mode for an operator, and then that operator will be ignoring the frequency normally associated with the key and will do a fixed frequency such as 5 Hz here on operator 2. This is a very small implied spacing between sidebands, so we don't end up perceiving sidebands or a complex tone quality. Instead we perceive a sine wave for operator 1 being given a vibrato of 5 wobbles of pitch per second. Okay, so what if we wanted to change that into something a bit faster or more extreme? Okay, so what if we now turn up the coarse control for the frequency of operator 2 and keep going? Okay, so yeah, we've got some really wild noises coming out. Okay, so now you can see the actual sideband separating out. If I increase the spacing to close to 440 Hz, which is the frequency of the A4 note I'm playing, then the note sounds fairly harmonic. That's a fixed spacing though. So as we go up the scale, the note goes inharmonic because the carrier frequency follows the keyboard and the spacing between the sidebands doesn't. Let's go back to ratio mode for operator 2 again to get back to a harmonic sound, and then explore adding more operators. Any operators connected horizontally are going to add instead of performing modulation, so we could turn up the level on operator 3 to add it to the tone. And there we go. We could turn down the coarse control on it to 0.5. And it's now giving us a sub-octave because it's set to half the frequency associated with the note I'm pressing. And we could modulate that by increasing the level for operator 4. So we've now got 2 FM chains adding together. Switching the level up on operator 4 and 5 and setting one of these to be fixed at say 5 Hz would give a vibrato. The other operator in the chain could be set in ratio mode with say f equals 1 to give an odd harmonic series, assuming that operator 3 is still set at f equals 0.5, as the modulation frequency is then twice the carrier frequency. You can also make vibrato with the low frequency oscillator section by increasing the PMD setting, that stands for pitch, modulation, depth control. The rate of the vibrato is set with the LFO speed control. That frees up operators for doing other jobs. Pitch glides can be set with the pitch EG area. There's also a normal old resonant low pass filter section if you need it. Okay, so that's an introduction to frequency modulation synthesis using the dexed instrument, which itself reproduces the sound processing in the Yamaha DX7. I hope this has helped you understand what it's doing in terms of the spacing between spectral components and how we can understand and control things with envelopes as well. Do comment with your insights into FM synthesis. Thanks for watching and see you next time.